Today I'm joined by drinks writer, judge, liquor merchant, and champion of the weird and wonderful Halliday taster, Mike Bennie. We're going to chat about natural wine, Halliday's new Wildcard category, under the radar regions, and much, much more. Mike, welcome to the Halliday Wine Companion podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now let's go back to the beginning. How did you get into the wine industry?
Well, I like to say that I was driven to drink by a career in law. And so I ended up actually, as I was finishing off my law degree at university, taking a part-time job driving the van for a fine wine merchant in Sydney. And as it increasingly dawned on me that law was perhaps not the career for me, the interest in wine accelerated. And I think probably the most potent moment of that time was that even as the delivery driver at this fine wine merchant, you were required to participate in the team tastings, which was typically 20 or so wines, brown bagged. You had to discuss them. And I thought, gosh, as a delivery driver, why is this something that was essential in terms of the work that I was undertaking? But lo and behold, if you were arriving at some well-to-do person's house who'd just got a Burgundy allocation, it was your job as the driver to be the front person. And so your understanding had to be at a level that was accepted by the client. And hence, I started to learn a lot while just driving a van.
That's so funny. You're well known for your love of natural wines. What is it about the style that you enjoy?
Well, look, I think the category of natural wine is really interesting. I see it as a quite broad umbrella in which there are wines that are not discernible from anything else that might be deemed on the other side of the coin from natural, right through to expressions that are very experimental, that are kind of like an abstract expressionist interpretation of wine. And I think the spectrum that exists between those two poles is a fascinating place to explore, just in terms of style and texture, weight, personality, that's potentially available from grapes. I think probably more important for me, though, is that all natural wine should be underpinned by really ethical and really thoughtful farming, which involves the use of no chemicals, and that the wines themselves are produced with minimal intervention, which gives you a greater sense of purity of the grape varieties, or at least gives the opportunity to explore what the grape varieties look like without the edifice of additions. And by and large, things that I like to consume are closer to the original source. When I think about vegetables, I like organic and farmers markets. When I think about meat, I like regenerative and organic farms. And this category of wine certainly has a kindred feel to things that I like consuming generally.
Now, you founded Rootstock Festival in, was it 2013?
2012, 2013, yeah.
Okay. So why did you decide to do it, and what was the sort of natural wine scene like back then?
It was interesting looking back through the annals of time and arriving at 2012 and a very young and burgeoning natural wine scene in Australia. Of course, there are producers who were doing things in a very natural way that predate that, but I think the excitement started happening just prior to 2010, for a younger generation at least anyway. And the natural progression was to try and find a platform for these producers who are emerging out of this sector of natural wine and trying to be able to explain that to a consumer base and to make it fun and to have music and art and culture surrounding it. And so Rootstock felt like the kind of natural end result of looking to find a platform to be able to share this joy that we were seeing from this emerging culture within the Australian wine community. So a bunch of us banded together in Sydney, and we worked out that if we had a small venue that was inexpensive, we could do things on a very, very small budget and try and create some good energy around the event. We expected about 1,000 people, somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 people turned up. And by the following year, we had 14,000 people at Carriageworks in Sydney.
Whoa.
So it was a pretty big leap for us to work it out. And we always framed it because we felt like we had such an amazing community around it supporting it that it was not for profit from day one.
Yeah.
So it was effectively a charity that we ran for the 5 or 6 years of its lifespan.
Amazing. And how had the scene changed by the end?
I think by the end, it was a really amazing, almost kind of binary shift in the culture around wine in Australia. A lot more people were at least talking about natural wine, what it was. They were either arguing about it negatively or taking a very positive bent. It unlocked the shackles for a lot of younger generation wine producers to explore things that they had perhaps been feeling inside themselves were a little bit antithetical when they were looking at the science-based approaches to winemaking they'd been taught.
Yeah.
And it gave them a bit of freedom. It gave them a place where they could find other people to learn from. It gave them a place where they could actually have a platform to be able to show things that they might have been doing as the kind of B-sides of their day job. It also gave people a lot of confidence that there was a market out there, which I think is important. People need to buy the products. It can't just be there on display. And so all of that, I think, became a great snowballing effect for younger generation producers within this oeuvre of wine in Australia, where they were like, wow, there's kindred spirits here, not just in winemaking, but also in the trade itself. And I think that was the great change in that period, was from a very, very niche thing, it became, while a small percentage of the wine produced in Australia, a very, very loud voice. And that made it really super exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you define natural wine? Because for me, like at its base, what like say Vanya Cullen's doing in terms of growing fruit biodynamically, making wine with no additives, etc., is natural winemaking at its purest form. But I don't think people would put Cullen wines in the same category as what was coming out of basket ranges in like 2010, that kind of thing. So how do you define what a natural wine kind of is?
Well, I think natural wine is under this umbrella in which Vanya Cullen can exist at the same time as those early adopters that were shaking things up from the basket range in the Adelaide Hills. For me, and it is defined in the French AOC system of what vin nature is. So people who say there is no definition, well, there is a legally legislated one in France these days. Quite simply for me, though, I say that it is wine produced from organic farm grapes, whether to certification or standard of certification.
Yeah. So
effectively a vineyard farm without chemicals, hand harvested and then brought into the winery and without the use of heavy machinery, vinified naturally with ambient yeast and then produced without additives and then bottled unfined and unfiltered and then with a very small dose of sulfur or zero sulfur. Okay. Depending on where your compass lies with the addition of sulfur.
Personally, I don't feel like I'm seeing as much of that sort of style of those really kind of old school gnarly natty wines coming out as much as I used to. Is it that those winemakers, say Gentlefolk and Pat Sullivan, like they're still winemaking, but they're making these like really ethereal, elegant wines with the same principles? Are they kind of doing that on purpose, or are they just getting better at winemaking? Like, is that style still around? Is it still popular?
I think there's been a really interesting shift in the world of natural wine in Australia, in which the more experimental, the more sort of wildly expressive fringe wines that were perhaps challenging for a lot of people and their conception of what wine should be, has continued to exist, but has also evolved. And I think part of that is that producers have realized that first and foremost, the great wines that they emulate of the world are wines that have a lot of longevity, that have a great deal of elegance and purity as part of their byword. And I think that sort of became a bit of a maturity for people who have now been almost a decade or more working in this way. And alongside that, there is still those who do sit at the fringe of the winemaking spectrum, and there's still an audience for it as well. Yeah. But I think it feels like those who came first have sort of fine-tuned what their offering looks like and decided that, well, sustainability in this business also is something that comes with learning how to make wine perhaps along a spectrum. Yeah. And then looking to not necessarily try and force a wine style, but just that their winemaking practice, their viticultural practices, if they are farming their own properties, are all getting better and better. Yeah. And the byproduct is what many people would consider finer wine that sits on that more neat and tidy spectrum while being classified by all of the things that would be conventionally known as natural wine.
So at the Halliday Awards this year, we introduced the Wildcard category for the first time, and that's meant to kind of capture the wines that are delicious, but that sat outside the, standard categories. What did you think of the what did you think of the Wildcard category and the wines that were put forward judging this year?
I think the Wildcard category at the Wine Companion judging was interesting to look at because it provides a point of difference. It encourages those who may think that judging is one thing to maybe appreciate that it can be a multitude of things. Yeah. And I think the category itself perhaps was a little lightweight in terms of entries this year. Yeah. I would have liked to have seen more, and I would like to see more confidence in submitting those wines for the
For the
wildcard
tasters.
category. Yeah, and I think tasters may need to perhaps look to things that are even more complex in their wild nature to really encourage diversity in that award. That being said, I like what I see, and I think that it's a very healthy place that a publication like Wine Companion is bringing this to the table, expanding the horizons for drinkers, and getting us wine judges as well to think more differently about how our approach to wine judging is and to what might be fine wine.
Do you think it's necessary to have this separate category, or is it more like, should we just be sort of categorizing them by varietal regardless of how they're made and comparing them against others in that varietal category, or is it necessary to have a separate category for them?
That's a great question. Inherently, there should be no categorization that says that a wine is wild or on the edge. I think, sure, that comes into play when you're describing the wine or reviewing a wine. I think that's a healthy point of commentary, just to point out sometimes what the characters of the wine might be that don't necessarily fit into expectation. But I think it's a much more robust and healthy wine scene in which all wine is considered together based on a matrix of drinkability, of inherent sense of quality, and then also a kind of visceral pleasure that you get from the wine. And that basically gives the taster the opportunity to just use a much broader sense of reference point rather than looking to what is typicity of a variety and then looking for what might be complexity and quality.
Yeah.
And so for me, I think that one of our requirements of our job is to drink and travel really broadly and to not necessarily find ourselves looking at the same things all the time, and to try and understand a spectrum of reference points for drinking that isn't just from a textbook, that isn't just what we're required to do by wine shows, that is something that draws on a breadth of culture and excitement around wine. So I think rolling those wines back into everyday categories is helpful.
Yeah.
Then again, they're not going to stand out. And then again, unfortunately, because of what happens sometimes when people are judging wine and looking to the vagaries of keeping a varietal characteristic neat and tidy versus letting some of the wider influences take some of those varietal characters away, it can get lost in a so it's a bit of a vexatious thing. We're going down a little nebulous time tube. It's hard to work out what's better or worse. For me, I'd roll everything together, but that's me being a little bit antithetical at times.
Is that everything? When you say everything together, is that like let's just get rid of categories altogether? Wine is wine, it's delicious, or is it just like there's too many variations? It's judging apples and oranges.
It's a great question again, or a great point of discussion. I remember being in wine shows up until about 6 or 7 years ago when I decided that I had done enough wine show judging, more or less, to sort of give me a really great idea of what they were like and what the people involved were like and what the spectrum of judging and results was. And I did a good decade of sometimes 7, 8, 9, 10 wine shows a year and really leaned in. And somewhere through that period, I decided quite arrogantly, and as an upstart, you wouldn't believe it, to go in with a 5-point plan into some of the big wine shows and say, here's a way of changing the way judging looks that I think is much more relevant to this day and age.
Do you mean things like criteria or just?
It was things like, first and foremost, paying judges properly, that judges are basically consultants working for wine shows who are at the highest level of skill in the industry, who work for free while fees are pouring into the organizations. And I know they do support wonderful regional associations and them doing a myriad of things. And they also support the Royal Agricultural Societies continuing to exist. But I felt that judges should be paid. I felt that wines should be judged by style. I thought to myself, how do I like approaching a wine list, and how do everyday drinkers approach wine lists? Well, if they look at the section that says Shiraz, but they actually mean full-bodied, warm climate Shiraz, it's very different to whole bunch, cool climate Shiraz, but it's all still in that one section. One wine at 11.5% alcohol, one wine at 15.5. And so I thought to myself, why not give consumers a bit more of an anchor into their own understanding of wine? That is, I like a light, fine red wine. I like a full-bodied red wine of power and presence. Why not judge in terms of style category, not judge in terms of variety? And I think that's something that can be taken much further. I then thought taking that further meant that at the end of a wine show, when the results are read out or broadcast, maybe on social media or maybe in a A4 sheet of paper that's printed out, it's very confusing looking at the categories and results and the scatter of scores and points, and it's not making much sense to people. Why not print out consumer-friendly guides that basically give listicles for what did best in each category?
Yeah.
The top 10 full-bodied Shiraz, the top 10 full-bodied red wines. And so this was something else that I proposed. In all of this, I think that the ideology behind it all was pretty sound. It ended up becoming what called the Drink Easy Awards, which lasted through 3 or 4 iterations and was somewhat decimated by the COVID lockdowns. But the kind of genesis came from this 5-point plan, and then the intent was to try and convince wine shows to kind of evolve.
Yeah.
And again, it was a very big, arrogant piece by me, but I felt very much like that there was a need to kind of engage more with everyday drinkers rather than sort of focusing on the wine industry and the technocratic nature of wine. Let's take it away from that. Let's roll things in together in different ways to make wine a bit more engaging for those everyday drinkers.
I am seeing that more in restaurants these days, that wines are categorized by style rather than variety or anything else. You know, you have, easy drinking reds or like whites with body, whites with texture, etc. And it's much easier. Like even someone who works in the wine industry, like I don't know every single wine on a list.
Yeah.
And it's really helpful, I think, when you're deciding what you want to drink to have it laid out in that format rather than, here's all the Chardonnays, here's all the Rieslings, etc. Because, unless you know all the wines or you got a really good somm, it's hard to tell.
That's exactly right. The idea that we have this amazing array of new younger generation producers. We have second labels from existing wine producers who are in established jobs. We have an incredible wealth of imports flooding into the country from established and new importers. So when you come to a wine list and it's deep and rich in its research by somebody who's carefully put together that list, but you don't recognize any names on it, it doesn't mean you're getting a B-grade offering, but it does mean that you kind of need a bit of GPS locating to try and work out where the things you like are on there. And definitely that style category for me is a really important thing. And again, just to bring it back into the world of wine judging, I think it should apply to us too.
Totally. So speaking of categorization, do you ever feel like you're pigeonholed as a natty wine guy? And how do you navigate that?
I think the fingerless gloves will do that for me. Yeah, look, I do feel that sometimes people misinterpret. I think it's very hard to talk about myself, even though we're all meant to be egotists as wine critics. But I do feel like people misunderstand or don't know about the very deep learning and background that I have in classic wine.
Yeah, please share.
Well, I mean, this is a 20-plus year career now in which my first forays into wine were done at one of Australia's finest fine wine stores, particularly focusing on the corporate market, and that was Best Cellars in Sydney.
Yeah.
And there it was really important to be across an entire spectrum of wine, local and imported. And that was underpinned by very classic but very open-minded study of wine. And so from that point and from my great interest in learning more about wine and trying to come to an understanding about what wine meant to me, and then pushing aside a career in law to fully jump into the world of wine, I thought to myself, I need to learn from the ground up everything in a very, I guess you'd say, academic way.
Yeah.
And so that academics led me into the world of classic wine and then led into the wine show system and Len Evans tutorial and similar. But the background was all about learning the classics. And then I like to say that I learned to be able to unlearn. And I started questioning things. And I think I was quite lucky in some respects, so I don't necessarily advocate it, in not doing any classic study in wine. I didn't do the WSET program. I didn't do any formal wine study. I just spent every dollar I had on books and traveling. And one thing that I did was exhaustively travel the globe, looking at winemaking practices Every holiday wasn't to a beach location. It wasn't to a city in Europe. I would go to wine regions.
Yeah.
And it was as much as I could. And then I was lucky enough to find ways to be able to facilitate that by doing international wine show judging, which would give me the great benefit of an airfare to overseas places.
Yeah.
And then I would expand my horizons from there. And I felt quite early on as well that while I needed to learn about the classics and visited all the right places in Europe, I also thought to myself, there's no way that I'm going to be better at, say, the wines of Bordeaux or the wines of Burgundy than established people in the market. So I'm in my mid-20s. I'm thinking about this career as a full-time wine writer and wine critic. So I thought to myself, well, why not go to the places other people don't? And so it started off, I guess, this image of me being not conventional and therefore being pigeonholed in a certain way. And I didn't really intend to do that. I just thought, gosh, there's no one covering these other places that exist.
Yeah.
And I want to see them and I want to be good at them. So I'm going to go to those places and try and learn about what makes them tick. And I think that's kind of characterized my career from my point of view, but a lot of people misinterpret that as one thing.
Yeah.
And that I've spent a lot of time trying to learn about natural wine and spent a lot of time with natural wine producers and visiting wine producers in region and speaking about it in public forums and writing about these things in public forums is basically a representation of I guess, some of my drinking habits, but not necessarily being definitive of what my knowledge is. It's just another addendum to what I learned originally, and I continue to learn as well. I mean, if I think about what I taste for the Wine Companion, I taste a spectrum of things from highly commercial supermarket wines circa $15 right through to the greatest wines that Australia produces. And in that spectrum is everything. And so I have to continue to learn about all things, I feel, to make myself better at my job. It's just that some people see that in a pretty narrow bandwidth, which is up to them. It's fine.
Yeah.
I've never been shy of confrontation. I've never been shy. No, I've never
Like, that's
been.
fine, but they're wrong, and I'll tell them why.
Yeah, that's well. No, I like to learn as well. But I think that sometimes when people get angry about an interpretation I might have about wines, they're pretty quick to pull that card out because it's easy for them without actually reflecting on their own work, and without reflecting on the vintage, the quality of the wine, or perhaps something that happened during that season.
Yeah.
And this is just in a pure play wine critic sense. It's not because there's one hat on while judging. Of course, you can't eliminate entirely bias, but I try and do my best with as much blind tasting as possible.
I was going to say, because you taste all your all your wines blind for the Companion, don't you? When you do
Just about, unless I'm in front of a producer,
Yep.
I try and taste all of my wines blind for Companion. Yeah.
Yep.
And that's something that I was taught from those early days driving the delivery van at Bestsellers, where we had to taste 20 bottles a week, even as a delivery driver in brown paper bags, to have the understanding about what wine is without judging the label or knowing what the producer is. And also it fine-tuned the wine community is obsessed with the adult guessing game of options. And blind tasting is such a curious thing that it's this parlor sport. I mean, it can make you think more deeply about a wine, but you can do that with a wine revealed. But I just like to do it because it knocks out a conventional sense of bias immediately as I'm tasting.
So beyond being a straight white man, you've never really presented as someone as how you'd expect someone in the wine industry to present. Has that been a kind of conscious choice, or are you just doing your thing?
It's a great question. There was a little pivotal moment when I was working in the fine wine merchant, and as I kind of ascended the rungs there, mostly through attrition and people leaving and me being asked to step up another rung inside that organization, there was a point where there was a kind of Berry Brothers and Rudd style English wine merchant who was running the place. And he said to me one day, as I was in cap and T-shirt and short shorts and socks and slides, he said, "If you dress like that, you'll never make it in this industry." And he handed me a blank check and said, "Go up to Oxford Street in Paddington and buy yourself 3 great outfits. We want you to go further. This is how I'd like you to do it." And I just said no. I said, "I'm not going to change who I am. This is myself.
Yep.
I'm understanding wine through the lens of my own personality." I was 24 or 25 at the time, and I just thought, I didn't make a conscious decision to dress like anything besides what made me feel comfortable and what I like being seen in. Image is a funny thing. I didn't go out there to create an image, if there is one. I just simply thought to myself, there are a lot of people I'm learning from in this industry who look and dress and act a certain way. And I thought to myself, if I'm going to talk about wine, then I want to talk about it with my friends, and I want to talk about it with extended groups of community that act like my friends. A generation of people didn't necessarily have somebody who wasn't conservative talking about wine in a certain way. And I think I slipstreamed into that quite naturally rather than actively looking to be that person. But I'm very grateful that I was able to do that. And it's not lost on me that I'm very lucky to have been able to put pen to paper quite early, to have my words in places that gave me some good byline, that gave me a sense of reputation that was able to, I think, provide me with not having to be too conventional in terms of my image. But it's hard to talk about because it's just me.
Yeah.
And I never wanted
I can't
to
imagine you any other way, but it's just, I feel like it's not as, it's more common these days, but I feel like when you started, it would have been quite, outrageous.
Yeah, it was. I was the guy in a baseball hat walking around tastings in some of the finest restaurants and bars in the country, and sitting on panels and people, putting question marks about my knowledge because people judge based on how you look often.
Yeah. One of the things I really admire about you is that you're very egalitarian when it comes to wine, and it's not just championing the less conventional styles, but also lesser known or less appreciated wine regions. One example that springs to mind is Granite Belt in Queensland. Like, you're such an advocate for that region, as well as countries like China and Georgia as well. Can you tell me a bit about these regions and why I guess you feel passionately about them?
I think the idea that I champion lesser known wine regions is pretty spot on. I think that my background when I was learning about wine was so keenly focused on learning about classics that I started to realize that the wealth of knowledge required to become expert at a level that would challenge people who are already experts in well-known wine regions was so insurmountable as a young person that I would try and look to the left of center to try and become maybe a light LITE expert in a variety of other regions that were less explored.
Yeah. And
so it set me off on a journey in which I visited, and I know this is a bit of bragging rights stuff, so forgive me for that, but I was visiting Jura at the genesis of people's interest in Jura and went back every year. I went to Friuli Venezia Giulia to look at the orange wines produced by producers like the Radicon family and the Granite family. I went to Savoie, sure, an alpine playground for the French and Swiss, but I went there and deeply invested time in the wine region there, Valais in Switzerland. And before I knew it, I was beginning to find this sort of burgeoning interest in going to the places that didn't necessarily get the headlines. And it was quite useful because when I looked at, for example, my early starts in Delicious magazine and Gourmet Traveller Wine magazine, what I could offer was exactly that. There was somebody already covering Tuscany. There was somebody already covering Bordeaux. There was somebody based in England who would cover Burgundy. So why would I try and compete with that when I could present a story that was unique and interesting, but also really turned me on because I was learning something and feeling like I'm getting some headway here with, the winds in my sails and my knowledge here. If I keep going back to these places, I'll find myself, increasing in knowledge and therefore enjoying my experiences here more, first and foremost, but also beginning to be turned to for advice perhaps or for education about some of these things, albeit that not a lot of people necessarily want to be educated about the smaller places. I think more so now as the world opens up and opens up and opens up.
They can't want to be educated about something that don't know exists, right? Like that's, sure, the more that they learn, the more that they'd be interested.
That's right. So places like Granite Belt in Queensland had largely been, well, look, in some respects, fairly, the wine quality may not have been hitting the radar for a lot of people. Certainly the wines were not drunk particularly often outside of Queensland.
Yeah.
Their coverage was very limited by journalists. And so I thought, well, here's a place to go headlong in Australia to try and really gain an understanding of what makes this region tick. And in that, I found some extraordinary things. And each year I find more. And I feel like the nexus between the wine's being revealed and the region being more visited now, particularly through COVID when Queensland was shut down. A lot of inbound tourism ran through Queensland wine regions. And so in that place, there's room for the local producers to kind of skill up and turn on the fireworks a bit more and fine tune the wine offering. And it's sort of a really exciting thing to see a region do that when there's effectively what looks like a boundary line on the 60 or so wine regions in Australia, and that's it. So that was pretty happy moment for me. I think I feel the same way about Swan Valley, which was largely ignored. It's so close to Perth. I mean, the Adelaide Hills couldn't be a more hot place to go and visit. If you go to Adelaide, you can hop in an Uber and be up in the Adelaide.
15 minutes.
Yeah, right. But it's the same from Perth. It's a 20-minute Uber ride from the city to go and see Australia's second oldest wine region, in which not only are there stately established producers, some of the finest fortified wines in the country, very old, amazing vines, but also a younger generation who are now going, oh, hang on, we can live in the big smoke while producing some avant-garde expressions of this place. And all of a sudden, again, there's a really exciting story to talk about.
Yeah.
And look, Georgia is the world's oldest winemaking culture alongside China. And so both those places are largely undescribed in Australian media, but look, to an extent, they've been there and wines have been reported on for a long time. And colleagues of mine have done great jobs, over the last decade or so to report at various stages about what's happening in Georgia particularly. But there's a frontier sort of nature to it. And what I've seen the last couple of years visiting Georgia is, again, an avant-garde scene underneath an already considered avant-garde scene alongside some of the oldest winemaking practices on earth, plus one of the great wine drinking cities now on earth, Tbilisi, and you've got this perfect storm of somewhere great to visit.
Yeah.
And China's doing off a very low base, something sort of similar.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's the large landmass agri-industrial approaches to winemaking that are on the rise, that are challenging volume of consumption from other countries imported into China from their own domestic consumption. A changing younger generation and sort of quasi-middle class that are looking to drink more inherently matched to the cuisine of the place that they're living in or visiting in China, rather than this image of China drinks Australian full-flavored red wine. I mean, it's so far from the truth of what I saw.
Yeah.
It's not even a ceremonial or gifting thing anymore. People are drinking light chilled reds. People are drinking orange wines. I mean, I went to an orange wine symposium in a 5-star hotel on the Bund in Shanghai, which was run by a sommelier team.
They've got a pretty thriving natural wine scene, don't they, in China?
Yeah, it's certainly, having gone to Provine and seen another in Shenzhen recently, another very large-scale wine fair. The hottest place to be at both wine fairs was at the stalls that were run by younger generation Chinese, if you will, the young gun, like in Australia.
Yep.
Thanks, Rory Kent. The young gun of China section was just where people were throngs to look at these experimental wines using local or hybrid grape varieties, reinterpretations of classic grape varieties, let's say predominantly French grape varieties, through the lens of pet nats and orange wines and light fresh reds and interesting blends that are sort of uncategorizable in some respects and flavor spectrums that are very different to what conventional understanding would have. But this scene is bubbling away. There's a simmer, and it's nice to be seeing that. And I'm fortunate to now have work that sort of veers me in that direction to have a look at what's going on there.
Now I'm going to ask you something completely different. I do remember talking to you about this quite a few years ago, so hopefully you still feel the same. But let's talk about wine and cheese pairing, because I know that it's traditionally something that people think is awesome, but we don't think it's quite as awesome as people think.
Yeah, look, I am a card-carrying member of the Not Wine and Cheese Club, which creates a great deal of controversy, particularly in public forums.
Totally, it's so funny.
Yeah, look, I just find that wine...
With exceptions, obviously.
There are exceptions, and it's normally at the fringes of wine.
Vin and Comte and...
Vin and Comte. They grow up together, though. See, this is the thing. If you have a wine region where there are grapes that are inherently grown for the food of the place, And we could say something like Chenin Blanc or Sauvignon Blanc from the Loire Valley and oysters.
Yep.
You can say the breast chickens of Burgundy or
And
proximate
Chablis,
surrounds with Chardonnay and Pinot. This all works well. But cheddar and Barossa Shiraz is pretty fucked. I mean, the lactic buildup in your palate from the cheese, putting the wine in there, it's just this onslaught of richness that has no boundaries. There's no refreshment factor in that. And really, I guess when I'm saying that wine and cheese don't necessarily work very well, and I know that there's people's heads who are exploding right now.
That's what we want. Controversy.
That's the, oh, well,
Clickbait. Rage bait.
Is that there's the way to refresh the palate is through very high acid and tannin. That works nicely, or high alcohol.
Yeah.
For me, I like sake.
Mm-hmm.
I like various types of beer, which is neither high tannin or necessarily high acid, but just has a refreshing effect.
Mm-hmm.
Farmhouse cider.
Yeah.
And typically types of spirit. And then
whiskey.
Whiskey is fantastic. Sherry works well. But just I find sometimes that wine and cheese, particularly when you've got a wine from a certain place or one or two wines from a certain place and this array of cheese that comes from 3 or 4 different cultures on a tasting plate, it just sort of doesn't make sense. If I'm going to drink wine and cheese, it's one massive block of something really good quality in terms of cheese and one wine that has enough cut to make the palate out control delete after every mouthful so you can actually taste the cheese properly.
It's time for quickfire questions. So if you weren't a wine critic, what would you be?
I'd like to be a national park ranger.
Okay, why?
Outdoors, nature, bit of investment in Australian flora and fauna.
Yep. What are you drinking at the moment?
Right now, mezcal.
Yep.
Also sparkling water.
Where are you drinking at the moment?
I'm loving Paradise, the new bar from the Fratelli Paradiso and 10 William Street crew in Sydney.
What's your favourite kind of value wine? So say under $30.
I like, as most people do, Australian Riesling, but I don't necessarily like it from where conventionally people might get it from.
Okay. Where would you like to get it from?
Great Southern.
Yep.
Tasmania.
Cool. What variety are you drinking most of at the moment?
Right now, I would say it's Aligote and Nebbiolo.
Have you had the Garage Aligote?
I have done.
It's so good.
It is lovely as well. Tilly J, big shout out there too.
Yes, I haven't had hers. It's always sold out.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Barney sells that too, but I got in early this year.
Blind Corner, Ben Gould, when he does a straight varietal one as well.
I'll have to seek them out. Favourite food and wine city in the world?
Right now, it's Tbilisi in Georgia. I just feel like that we've had our moments with Copenhagen. We've had our moments with Tokyo, the rising star, and Sydney as well, I would say. It's wherever Noma traipses to seems to be a bit of a hotbed.
Yep.
But I think Tbilisi in Georgia is where the rising star is. There is an incredible culture of both local food with international influence, great tradition, a diversity of culture, and then just the wine scene there is exploding. It's probably one of the most vibrant places to eat and drink right now.
I'd really like to go, and a lot of that's because of all the things you've said about it. Favourite food and wine pairing?
Favourite food and wine pairing would probably be right now the amazing French chip brand Brett's.
Oh, they're so good. The
Jura
ones,
cheese,
the Jura ones, yeah.
With Van Joan.
Yum.
That works.
Yes. Cheese, that's the exception to cheese.
That's
if they're in
where
chip form.
cheese works beautifully. That's right.
Do you have a wine guilty pleasure? Like, do you like to add iced, or I guess red wine out of the fridge might count, but
yeah, I think probably the real guilty pleasure is drinking red wine very cold out of the fridge. I don't mind adding ice. Oh, and also I really love drinking really cold red wine out of the fridge in crystal cut tumblers. That is just magic.
So you don't have to be guilty about that. That's awesome.
It's nice. Yeah.
Oldest wine you've tried?
Oldest one I've tried, I've drunk 19th century Madeira, which I think not a lot. That's such a jerk off thing to say.
But it's probably, yeah. I know what you're trying to say.
Yeah, 19th century Madeira. I have been lucky enough to try some red wines from the 19th century. Probably the most memorable wine that is old obviously is Seppeltsfield's Para.
Oh, yeah. Do you have a bucket list wine?
Bucket list wine would be, I would love to be able to try 1978 Macler Van Joan.
Yeah.
Which is birthier, plus also I just love the producer. And I've seen very old wines from this producer, but I'd like to see what happened in my birth year.
All right, I'm putting you on a plane tomorrow to a wine region you've never been to. Where are you going?
Oh, that's a good one. I think I would like to go to the wine region in Tibet.
Oh, yeah?
So the burgeoning Chinese natural wine scene and burgeoning Chinese avant-garde wine scene focuses on a bunch of different regions, but there's a few producers who are producing wine out of Tibet. And while the wines are not necessarily marked in terms of quality, they're just of great interest. And I think that being able to see where they're grown in that quite fringe climate would be really fascinating.
Yeah, awesome. That's all from me. So where can we find you on socials?
Mike Bennie 101.
Mike Bennie 101. And anything to plug before we finish?
The wonderful Halliday Wine Companion.
Oh, yes. Out now.
Yeah, that's
All
right.
good bookstores. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me, Mike.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Halliday Wine Companion podcast. Thirsty for more? Join the Halliday Wine Club for premium 95+ point wines delivered monthly. Visit winecompanion.com.au or check the show notes to subscribe.